probably all the publicity has been favorable to the National Football League. I think that I feel we're on an equal basis with the National Football League today, and I think that as soon as the American Football League wins a Super Bowl game, then there isn't going to be this question.
That was Lynn Dawson in the summer of 1968. He predicted the American Football League needed only a Super Bowl victory to answer the question whether or not the AFL was ready for full partnership. After 2 Super Bowl championships, the answer is clear. June 8, 1966 was the day the National and American Football Leagues agreed to merge and become one. 3 years later, the team owners finally settled on realignment. Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh agreed to move into the newly formed American Conference. This marked the end of the AFL and the NFL as separate leagues. With its colorful but brief 10-year history, the American Football League had come a long way since 1960, when the Denver Broncos defeated the Boston Patriots in the first AFL game. The partisan Boston crowd anticipated victory on this historic night, but the Broncos were just as anxious to win. Gene Mingo, a 21-year-old Navy veteran, stunned the Patriots with this 76-yard punt return. The Broncos upset the Patriots 13-10. Some of the events that helped create the success story of the American Football League were a $36 million television contract, transforming the bankrupt New York Titans into the Jets. Expansion, with Miami in 1966, followed by Cincinnati in 1968. And finally, 2 consecutive Super Bowl victories. Many people may have forgotten that it was Lamar Hunt who began the ball rolling with the idea to form a second professional league back in 1959.
Well, I suppose that I had several motivations for the starting of the AFL. First of all, I have always been a football nut. Maybe a sports nut would be a better description. And I felt that the city of Dallas should have a pro football team. Dallas was my home. And the growth of the game was just becoming the game itself, as played by the National Football League, was just becoming a major factor in American sports. And I made an effort to get a National Football League team for Dallas, tried to purchase an existing team, talked to them about expansion, and to make a long story short, that led to the formation of the American Football League.
Mar and I met Mr. Hallis in Chicago, and he tried very hard to persuade us not to start this new league, that it would be very costly, it wouldn't be good for pro football.
Wayne Valley, the colorful president of the Oakland Raiders, commented at that time that he thought that instead of being known as the executive committee of the league, the club owners should better be called the Foolish Club.
1960, 61, and even 62 were very grim years.
It appeared that we were never going to get our head above water, but we were determined to stay with it.
The Denver franchise at one time indicated they were almost ready to throw in the towel. In 1962, the New York Titan franchise had financial problems and declared bankruptcy.
Every obstacle that one could put in front of another was put in front of the American Football League, and yet our growth continued.
I would say that there were two turning points in the American Football League's growth, which were the keys to our making it. One was the announcement of our new 5-year television contract with the National Broadcasting Company. This was in January or February of 1963. This was vital because it ensured us the income to be able to compete against the National Football League for players, which was, as I said, vital. The second happening took place a little earlier, and it was the advent of the Sonny Werblin Group into the ownership of the New York Titans. They changed the name to the Jets at that point, and although they had to play one more year in the Polo Grounds and still drew very slim crowds, the advent of Sonny and his show business knowledge, his entertainment field knowledge, was a key to the growth in the New York market, which later burgeoned once the team got into Shea Stadium.
While the executives were solving their administrative problems, the players were busy introducing exciting wide-open football. In the early years, the long pass dominated play. Cookie Gilchrist was one of the league's first power runners. Offense was the name of the game, and Cookie's explosive style was making headlines. As the league matured, so did the defenses, and brawn gave way to finesse. The biggest weakness was on pass defense. Babe Perilli, who was quarterbacking in the AFL from the very beginning, saw this weakness diminish as the league came of age.
I think the league has certainly come a long way. I can think back when the league first started. I think our biggest problem was the fact that the defensive backs weren't, really too sharp. All you had to do is go back and throw the long bomb, and 50% of the time you could probably complete it. As far as the quarterbacking standpoint is concerned, we did a lot more checking off and automaticing because we had a lot more blitzing in those days. I think we have less blitzing now, and we've settled down to more of a standard straight type of defense where it's man against man. It was man against man up front as well. Houston Antwine remembers the days when just strength told the story.
The first couple of years, as a defensive tackle, it was relatively simple. You just beat the guy in front of you to a pulp.
The defensive backs were learning fast. One of the league's best was, and still is, Johnny Robinson of the world champion Kansas City Chiefs.
I think there's a knack to intercepting a pass. For instance, sometimes you pick up clues from reading the quarterback's eyes when he's getting ready to deliver the ball and things like this that seem to help defensive back come up with the interception. But I think the big pass rush is probably the most vital thing, making the quarterback make that mistake, throw a little early, throw a little off step. And fortunately, our big boys on our club give us that big pass rush, and of course that certainly helps a defensive back as much as anything.
As more emphasis was placed on the defensive secondary, the overall style of the league took on a new look. They called it sophistication. The defensive stars, like Johnny Robinson, were finally in the headlines. As a league, there were many teams that developed their own individual personalities. San Diego always seemed to burn up the track with blistering speed in the backfield. Balancing the attack was the passing combination of John Hadle to Lance Allworth. San Diego proved to be one of the most exciting teams in the American Football League. The Oakland Raiders developed one of pro football's most devastating passing attacks. The philosophy was to utilize the pass-catching talents of the running backs as well as the flankers and ends. Defensively, the opposition never knew who was going to wind up with the football.
The maximum use of backs as pass receivers gave the Raiders a look all their own, and had coaches in both leagues taking notes. In New York, the Jets became the toast of the town as Joe Namath demonstrated the art of reading defenses. The Jets' balanced attack eventually brought the AFL its first Super Bowl championship. Kansas City coach Hank Stram introduced an imaginative multiple offense with a moving pocket. This strategy allowed quarterback Len Dawson more time to throw the ball and limited the enemy's pass rush. The moving pocket proved very effective against the NFL Vikings in the 4th Super Bowl game. Many believe that Kansas City offense is the offense of the future in professional football. The conflict between the leagues was never more evident than in the battle for players. Billy Cannon was the first college star to join the AFL.
Billy came to us under strange circumstances. He admitted to me that he'd signed a contract with the Los Angeles Rams, and I agreed to double the salary that he was received from the Rams. And then the Los Angeles Rams filed a lawsuit against Billy, which naturally we had to defend him and had to defend him in the Los Angeles courts, and won the case on the basis that the judge said that he thought Billy should have the maximum amount of money, and we'd offered him the maximum amount, so he should play with the Oilers, and we got our first superstar.
Lance Allworth also chose the American Football League. He almost signed with the NFL and didn't know it.
When I went with San Diego, I was drafted by San Francisco. And I was drafted number 2 by San Diego and number 1 by San Francisco. And it's really funny because I never really talked money with San Francisco. Al Davis just did a fantastic job of selling me on the San Diego Chargers. And I met with him, and when I did sign, we were playing in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. And of course, you can't sign if you're playing in the bowl game. And I was going to sign under the goalpost. And Coach Brawls, of course, kept telling me, he was our coach at Arkansas, he said, no, I don't want you to do anything to upset the boys, because we were playing Alabama. And they had a fine football team. But after the ball game, of course, there was a big mix-up, and I didn't see Al, but I saw one of the other Charger scouts, and the guy whom I thought was a Charger scout, and it ended up he was with San Francisco. And he had me over there on the goalpost, and I almost signed, but I didn't. And Al walked over about that time and saved me, but I'd almost signed, and I hadn't even talked money with him.
Allworth went on to become one of pro football's most feared pass catchers. When the Kansas City Chiefs signed Otis Taylor, they got a pass receiver who knew what to do with the ball after he caught it. Lamar Hunt wasn't about to let Otis get away.
He was being closely guarded by NFL babysitters in the Dallas area. And in one night, the night before the draft, he was moved from, I think, 3 or 4 different motels to try to make our agents lose his trail. And our scout, Lloyd Wells, was successful in getting Otis out the window at about 4 in the morning and spiriting him to the airport and flying him up here to Kansas City, where we drafted Otis in a high round the next morning and signed him. And it ended very happily for us.
In 1965, New York sold nearly 25,000 more season tickets than the previous year. Why? Because Sonny Werblin signed Joe Namath to a contract calling for an estimated $400,000.
$400,000 for a football player? Well, that's ridiculous. Football players said it was ridiculous. Everybody said it was ridiculous for somebody to pay that type of money for an individual, untried. But the thing is, what it did accomplish, I think, looking back now, is that it got everybody to look at the American Football League. And finally they said, well, I'm going to watch this.
And watch it they did. Broadway Joe became a celebrity in New York and eventually led the Jets to a world championship. The Kansas City Chiefs were still finding more plums on the tree. Heisman Trophy winner Mike Garrett was one of the more pleasant surprises to come out of the battle for players.
Mike, I think, is probably one of the most complete backs that I've ever coached. We really thought, however, that he was committed to the Los Angeles Rams, and as a result, we didn't get involved in drafting him early because of this commitment we thought he had to the Rams. And very frankly, there was a little doubt as to whether or not Mike would be able to be big enough to endure the duration of a 20-game campaign in professional football. But in the 20th round, he wasn't drafted by anybody in the American Football League, and we sincerely felt that we should go ahead and draft him and hope for the best, and it is one of the great things we've done as a football team since 1960.
Pete Gogolak of the Buffalo Bills was the first of the soccer-style kickers to make it big in professional football. He was also the first named player to jump from the AFL over to the NFL. Gogolak signing with the New York Giants bitterly intensified the rivalry between the two leagues. The American Football League's growth continued, and the fans were treated to bigger and better stadiums. Also, former NFL coaches were bringing their experience and ideas into the younger AFL. Baltimore's Weeb Ewbank came to New York. Detroit's George Wilson became the coach of the new Miami Dolphins. Cleveland's Paul Brown found a home with the Cincinnati Bengals. And in one of the biggest surprises, Don Shula left the NFL Colts to become head coach at Miami, replacing George Wilson. Coach Shula was only too familiar with the AFL. In the third Super Bowl game, the Colts were heavy pregame favorites. But Jets quarterback Joe Namath took issue with the experts. Namath didn't predict victory, he guaranteed it. Joe's confidence was contagious as the Jets followed their leader's game plan perfectly in the Orange Bowl. Audibles at the line of scrimmage enabled Namath to destroy any blitzing tactics by Baltimore. Matt Snell served as an effective pass receiver as well as runner. Snell scored the game's first touchdown, and the Jets knew they could move the football on the pride of the NFL. If there was one play that ruined the Colts on Super Sunday, this was it. Baltimore had used it successfully during the regular season. Only this time, quarterback Earl Morrall did not see Jimmy Orr, who was all alone downfield. Jim Hudson picked off the pass, and the Colts' threat was wiped out. The Jets slowly began pulling away from Baltimore. Jim Turner applied the pressure with the first of 3 field goals. Joe Namath encouraged his teammates, while Turner put the game on ice with his 3rd field goal. With the score 16-7, old pro Johnny Unitas was trying desperately to beat the clock. Finally, Randy Beverly cut in front of Jimmy Orr for the interception that closed the door on the stunned Colts. Joe Namath called his shot. The Jets had accomplished the impossible. A 16-7 Super Bowl victory over the best of the NFL. Neither team got into the Super Bowl the following year, but the predictions remained the same. This time, the Minnesota Vikings, with their devastating defense, were supposed to beat the American Football League representative Kansas City Chiefs. But like the previous year, the underdog scored first. Jan Stenerud gave the Chiefs an early 3-0 lead. And it was the soccer-style specialist booting another shortly thereafter. The New Orleans Super Bowl crowd couldn't believe the scoreboard. The Chiefs, with pro football's most imaginative offense, were causing the Vikings' tough defense all kinds of problems. This reverse by Frank Pitt set the stage for Jan Stenerud. Kansas City was playing smart, aggressive football and leading 9-0. During the regular season, it was usually the Vikings who grabbed the lead, then called on their spirited defense to turn back the opposition. Now the shoe was on the other foot, and Minnesota was in trouble. Coach Hank Stram and quarterback Lenny Dawson had the play that couldn't miss if everyone did his job. It was a trap that sprung Mike Garrett loose and into the end zone. Unbelievable. Kansas City had Minnesota on the ropes. The Chiefs led 16-0. The knockout punch was finally applied by Otis Taylor. Taylor refused to stop running until he reached the end zone. The Chiefs' versatile offense had done the job. Now it was up to the defense. For Viking quarterback Joe Kapp, this was his longest day. The Kansas City defense was magnificent. For the second straight year, the AFL had captured the championship of professional football. For the American Football League, the battle was won. Parity was achieved, and the struggle for survival was over.
It appears Len Dawson's early prediction was a very accurate one. The American Football League made believers out of doubters after the Jets' initial Super Bowl victory. And for those who thought it was a fluke, it was Len Dawson himself who directed the Kansas City Chiefs to another Super Bowl championship just 1 year later. This time, the NFL Vikings fell to the AFL champions. Kansas City coach Hank Stram later predicted his team's multiple offense, with its famed moving pocket and tricky reverses, would be pro football's offense of the future. What about the future of the game? The fan, the records, the Super Bowl, and TV? How will the merger and new alignment affect professional football? I believe football is about to enter into an era of prosperity such as it has never known before. As far as the game itself on the field is concerned, I think it's reasonable to assume that Hank Stram's prediction is at least partially right. We went through an era in professional football when almost every team used a quarterback, 2 setbacks, a tight end, a split end, and a flanked halfback. And the detractors of pro football used to say to the coaches, defensively, does your contract require that you open the game with a 4-3 defense? Well, we've already seen departures from these standards, and with younger and brighter men now in the game, it's only reasonable to assume that we'll see other innovations on the field in professional football. As far as the records are concerned, they'll be more indicative now because the teams are playing each other. There was a time when the staunch NFL fans said, what does an AFL passing record mean? They were aware that when the AFL began, it was primarily an offensive league of necessity. They said, what does a passing record mean? Because there is no pass defense in the American Football League. Well, that's been pretty well disproven by now. And, of course, playing each other, records will apply to the performances all over the league in both the conferences. As far as the Super Bowl is concerned, I think it'll continue to be the showcase of professional football, just as the World Series is the showcase of professional baseball. Maybe the best games will be the ones for the conference championships, just as the best games are sometimes those for the league championships in baseball, because until you win there, you don't get into the big one. But the Super Bowl, I think, will still be the showcase of pro football. Television, the television fan has really hit a bonanza because right now, professional football is receiving major exposure on all 3 of the major networks.